As we continue to put the pieces together in this investigation, it's important that we look at every detail. And as the search for Stacey continued with very little in terms of leads and suspects, her family and friends start to grow weary, worrying that Stacey's case will never be solved. With that in mind, we fast forward to August 2nd, 2001. This is episode 5, The Psychics. It has now been 3 years since Stacey disappeared from her apartment. Unfortunately, the case has been dormant now for the last 3 years. Now, I'm going to discuss 2 psychic recounts in this episode. For many, this might seem strange if you're not a believer in the paranormal. But whether you believe or not, I think it's important to consider all details and information when investigating. As we continue in Stacey's case, you'll see why these recounts are important. The use of psychics in police investigations is a confrontational topic. Psychic mediums have been used in the past to help aid in solving unsolved homicides and missing persons cases dating back to the 1800s. Unfortunately, their testimonies and statements are not admissible in court, so they're simply used as a means of potential information. Psychics were not used by detectives in Stacey's case, but I was able to find 2 specific recounts from 2 separate individuals claiming to have psychic abilities who provided very detailed descriptions of what they believe happened to Stacey. Now, of course, these recounts may be completely off and far from the truth, or they can provide some shockingly accurate descriptions of where Stacey's remains are found 3 years later. Now, just a warning, the descriptions in these psychic recounts are very graphic, so please be mindful as you continue to listen on. Psychic report number 1. Thursday, August 2nd, 2001. From Anonymous. The subject line states, "Tip received." To whom it may concern, the disappearance of Stacey Colbert has haunted me from the very moment I heard of it on the evening news one night 3.5 years ago. I wasn't even watching the TV at the time. I was putting my daughter to bed when I heard the information coming from the TV in the other room. I froze where I was, barely moving a muscle, while the reporter told her story. I didn't sleep at all that night. Let me tell you why. I'd like to preface this by saying that I'm not some new age crackpot who goes around trying to tap into the energies of the universe. I am, in fact, a very pragmatic and grounded person. That being said, I have had occasion to experience what one might consider psychic episodes. As far as I can remember, most all of these experiences have involved a violent death. They're very disturbing visions that erupt out of nowhere, usually triggered by a news report. That's what happened the night I heard of Stacey's disappearance. As I stood there in my daughter's darkened room, I was bombarded with visions. The first was of Stacey's face, lifeless and blank, her eyes open and staring into nothingness. She had been strangled, so her face was swollen and her eyes had red splotches in the sclera from the broken blood vessels. It was a profoundly disturbing sight. Each time I closed my eyes, I would see more. I saw that she was stuffed in a big garbage bag, the kind used for construction debris. Then she was sealed in a second garbage bag, much like the first, fastened with a cable tie. Her body was then bound with either coaxial cable or electrical wiring, which was tied to a number of cinder blocks. She was lying under about 30 feet of water next to the footer of a bridge. I can't be sure which bridge it was, but there can't be many across the area that have footers and are in 30-foot deep water. As time has passed, I've gotten more visions of details about Stacey's murder. I believe the perpetrator was a young man. For some reason, the age of 26 stands out for me. He was an average man, nondescript in every way. He had brown hair and brown or hazel eyes. He was under 6 feet tall, perhaps around 5'10", and 170 pounds. He knew Stacey casually, but had developed something of an infatuation with her. This infatuation turned into something of an obsession, as I believe he was stalking her. In fact, I think that he followed her to Mirror Lake that Saturday. I get the impression that he arranged things to make it seem that they had just happened to run into each other coincidentally at the park. How about that? Funny seeing you here. Her guard was down and had no suspicions of this man. They talked, they walked. He was emboldened by her friendliness and openness. When he came to her door, she would have let him in without questioning it because she knew him. He was expected, perhaps, to watch a movie or two, since neither of them had a date or plans for the evening. Maybe they even went to the movies. I'm not entirely sure. At some point, he makes advances. She's shocked. As to her, it wasn't a date, and she had no romantic interest in him. They were just acquaintances. The killer is deluded. He believes she's been coming on to him all night. He's enraged at this rejection. Apparently, he was under the mistaken impression that she wanted him and became so infuriated when she rebuffed him that he threw her down on the bed and ended up strangling her. I see him putting her body in the plastic bags and tying it up with the wire and the cinder blocks. Then I see him putting the whole assembly on the back of an older white Chevy pickup truck with green markings. It was a fairly old truck, probably dating from the early 80s. He dumps her into the river. It's just before sunrise. It's still very dark with the light just beginning to show in the east. Then I see him leave, going west. He doesn't have much. Takes even less. He's on the road by the time it gets dark on Sunday. I got the impression that he was headed toward Arizona, possibly. I have been struggling over whether to contact the police in this matter for years now. I was so unsure as to what to do. I was afraid that all of these impressions were just the work of my overactive imagination. I kept asking myself, what if I'm wrong, and they take me seriously? What if I'm sending them on a wild goose chase, only to be followed by, what if I'm right, and they find her body? Would they think that I could have been involved? So for the last few years, those nagging doubts have been winning out. Then, there was the story on the news Tuesday night. You see, the very mention of Stacey's name brings me to tears. I'd see the flyers on the telephone poles around campus, and I'd feel sick to my stomach. I even carried one of the flyers with me for a while, fueling that inner debate on whether or not I should call. That's all I've been able to think about for the last couple of days. I know that her family is Jewish, and that it's very important to them to be able to put her body to rest, even if they never find her killer. Now I find I'm asking myself, what if you could have helped them find her 3 years ago? What if her family could have buried her then? What if the police could have gotten fingerprints off the plastic bags and identified the murderer? I feel so awful. I just don't know what to do. I don't know if you can take me seriously. I may just come off sounding like a crackpot. I only want to help in any way that I can. Stacey's image haunts me, although I've never met her in my life. In any case, I hope and pray that you find her. Sincerely, Anonymous. Now let's dive into Psychic Report number 2. Tuesday, December 14th, 2004. From Anonymous. Subject line reads, Another Thought. I too have been having so-called visions for about 4 years now. I actually pick up on feelings rather intensely, and they've been haunting me for a while now. It all started when I started working in the northwest part of town and had to drive by Stacey's apartment complex every day. At first, I wasn't sure it was her situation that I was seeing until her body was recently found, and news reports started showing various clips. Now I'm certain that it was her murder I saw. Please note here that I'm leaving some vivid details out. At this point, I don't want to be too graphic since this might not be helpful at all. and I don't want to upset people. The man that attacked her was a coworker or neighbor, or possibly both. He was about 5'10", average build, dark blonde hair, brown eyes, and at the time had a thin mustache. I don't see him wearing glasses. He was obsessed with her, and often would watch her jog early in the morning. The feelings I got when driving by Atrium Park were very spooky. He was definitely not part of her social circle at Ohio State. He somehow ran into her that Saturday. Or he could have been following her, and she politely turned him away. He was crushed. He stayed up all night, driving around, wondering how she could break his heart like this, the only woman he's ever loved. He knew she woke up at 4 a.m., so he went to her apartment that morning feeling very confused and emotional. She let him in because she noticed how upset he was. He started to scare her, and she asked him to leave and started to walk away from him. This is when he snapped. He chased after her and eventually threw her to the living room floor, where he strangled her. This all happened in about 5 minutes' time. He took her out in a black garbage bag and drove out to the country via Hayden Run Road. This is all I see, although I did visualize the exact same field the previous poster mentioned. I'm not convinced, though, that this was the first place he took her. Something deep inside tells me he had to move her in October or November 2001 because the place he was keeping her was sold. This man since then has had very turbulent relationships with other women. I feel that he's been arrested or had a complaint filed against him at least once for beating a girlfriend. He has a very negative attitude toward women and mostly keeps to himself. I'm so sorry to the family for having to endure all this speculation with no hard evidence. I realize there's no closure here when you have a family member missing every holiday. Since someone else was brave enough to share their story, I figured at this point it couldn't hurt to share mine. I can tell you this, I'm very, very certain that Stacey's killer will be caught, and that the police have always suspected who it might be, but lacked hard evidence. They needed one big break to solve this case, and I deeply believe finding her remains is that break. The family will soon be able to move on. Sincerely, Anonymous Poster. Now, these psychic recounts are interesting and very descriptive. It's even been suspected by other sleuths investigating the case, and what I found via Reddit threads of Stacey's case, that one of these individuals may actually be the killer based on the descriptive details that they provide. Of course, this is pure speculation, and no truth has come of these anonymous psychics being Stacey's killer. Now, both of these recounts are quite different, and they're not exactly spot on. However, it is quite disturbing how close some of the information in these statements is to the place Stacey's remains are finally found in 2004. Episode 6, A Voice Silenced, is available right now. Make sure to follow us on social media at Unseen Truth Podcast and visit unseentruthpodcast.com for more case information.